Lauren Packard is a senior policy analyst at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, where she works on technology policy with a focus on crypto. She has 10 years of experience in environmental law, including as a litigator in the Center for Biological Diversity's Climate Law Institute and at the California Department of Justice. She holds a JD from Columbia Law School, where she received the Alfred S. Forsyth Prize for Excellence in Environmental Law, and a BA from Harvard University.
So thank you for the kind introduction. I work at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, which is a global tech policy think tank with offices in Accra, Singapore, San Francisco, and London. We all know that crypto has a big emissions problem. So using our collective legal, scientific, and policy backgrounds, doing desk research, speaking with advocates on the ground, we have put together a white paper with policy recommendations to address carbon pollution and other issues from cryptocurrency. And those findings are what I'm going to communicate here today. So as you know, Bitcoin's proof of work consensus mechanism is incredibly energy intensive, and this is a feature, not a bug. As you can see here on the left, the energy use of Bitcoin mining surpasses that of many countries. And miners are incentivized to use whatever energy is cheapest and to mine around the clock. For example, some have attributed the recent dip in Bitcoin price in part to the heat waves in Texas, which led the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, to ask miners to temporarily halt operations to ensure there was enough energy left for air conditioning. Obviously, it's difficult to know exactly where miners are sourcing their energy around the world. However, it's estimated that the majority of mining uses fossil fuel energy, and even decommissioned fossil plants have been used to mine crypto. In Texas, Pennsylvania, New York, Montana, and other states, idle, bankrupt, or decommissioned fossil plants have been recommissioned to mine crypto. In fact, actual use of renewable energy by Bitcoin miners has fallen in recent years. This is mostly attributable to the Bitcoin mining ban, or crypto mining ban in general, in China, instituted in September 2021. Miners there were mostly using cheap hydropower, and then they left for other jurisdictions where cheap renewables were not as available, like Kazakhstan and the US. Okay, next slide. But a ban on mining is not an answer. Outright prohibition is not going to solve the emissions challenge. As we see from the China ban in September 2021, some miners traveled to friendlier jurisdictions that often had dirtier energy, like Kazakhstan and the United States, and other miners simply went underground, using VPNs or proxy servers to hide their location and avoiding regulatory oversight altogether. Egypt, Iraq, Qatar, Oman, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Bangladesh have also banned crypto mining. However, these bans will not address crypto's emissions problem. Miners will either go somewhere else or go underground. But regulation is needed. Kazakhstan, for example, seemed like a safe haven for miners with cheap electricity and lax regulations. In his 2020 State of the Union address, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev even encouraged miners to decamp there, but the country was ill-equipped to handle the ensuing surge in electricity demand, about 7% of countrywide electricity use. This increased demand, coupled with aging infrastructure, led to frequent blackouts and subsequent political unrest and backlash. In October, the government announced it would cut off miners' power supply. In January, it instituted taxes on miners. Mobile search parties and tip lines to ferret out unregistered miners were next. A lack of regulatory oversight and comprehensive energy policy backfired on miners. Similarly, miners have faced backlash in parts of the US. In Texas, because of how long-term demand response contracts for energy are structured, crypto mines get paid to power down during demand surges, such as during heat waves or winter storms, to the tune of millions of dollars. In fact, some Texas miners make more money from electricity arbitrage than from mining activities. Those costs get passed on to ratepayers, leading to citizen ire. During the heat wave this summer, the price of energy reached $5,000 per megawatt hour, and residents, as a result of the energy issues as well as environmental issues from crypto mining, are protesting a planned new facility by Riot Blockchain in Corsica. So what is the appropriate role for governments worldwide? Clearly, to lower carbon pollution and other emissions from crypto mining, it's incredibly important to use zero emissions energy, especially considering the troubling reports of fossil fuel plants being recommissioned to power crypto mines. This is only a small part of the solution. Federal decarbonization commitments in the US and elsewhere require rapid electrification of the transportation and building sectors. Climate change will also lead to electrification, to increased energy requirements, such as for air conditioning during heat waves and heating during winter storms. This means renewable energy demand is at risk of outpacing supply. Aging grid infrastructure in many parts of the US and around the world makes this issue worse. Therefore, the most effective way to address crypto's emissions problem is to use more energy efficient technologies, primarily more energy efficient consensus mechanisms to drastically reduce the energy requirements. Other efficiencies are important as well, such as circular economy initiatives to address e-waste from obsolete application-specific integrated circuits that are used for mining. Governments must also ensure their citizens are not burdened by increased rates or air, water, or noise pollution. If you're wondering about carbon offsets at this time, TBI is not recommending them as a policy priority, but I will mention them later on. These kind of regulatory oversight and comprehensive energy policy benefits miners as well. Regulation leads to regulatory certainty, which can increase institutional investor interest, among other benefits. And by proactive measures, the private sector can gain regulators' trust and thereby avoid flat out bans and other prohibitive measures. So addressing the question of energy efficiency, there are many consensus mechanisms that are more efficient than proof of work and are likely more appropriate in many contexts. Here's a logarithmic heat map we made at TBI that contextualizes the energy requirements of Bitcoin and Ethereum's 1.0, which uses proof of work, along with a variety of other consensus mechanisms, such as proof of stake and proof of authority, and other technologies besides blockchain, like Hashgraph and directed acyclic graph. So as you can see, Bitcoin and proof of work is obviously the most energy intensive. Ethereum estimates that switching from proof of work to proof of stake will reduce its energy intensity by 99% or more. There's also a variety of other consensus mechanisms that are not on this graph, including proof of activity, proof of believability, proof of devotion, proof of reputation, proof of weight, and many others. To that end, researchers at Bournemouth University in the UK have adapted this decision tree to help policymakers ascertain whether a blockchain is appropriate And if so, whether a permissionless, public permissioned, or private permissioned blockchain makes the most sense. For a blockchain to be an appropriate solution for a use case, there must be more than one entity that generates transactions, and there must be some level of distrust between these entities. Otherwise, a centralized database might make more sense. So these are our findings. These are the policy recommendations we've put forth in regards to switching to more efficient consensus mechanisms, as well as just efficient technologies overall. And just to note, due to the international nature of the audience here, I'm using the term energy policymakers as an umbrella term for all of the different decision makers implicated in energy policy, which, for example, here in the US, it's a very complicated patchwork of overlapping jurisdictions and authorities. So there's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that has jurisdiction over wholesale rates, and then there are state utility regulators and utilities and nonprofits and regional systems owners. So energy policymakers, just an umbrella term. The only way that policymakers can ensure that energy efficient protocols are used is to impose energy efficiency limits on miners. Energy policymakers can impose minimum energy efficiency limits based on kilowatt hours per square foot to ensure the methodology being used to mine crypto is the best available technology and uses the least amount of energy possible. These limits should be technology agnostic and increase in stringency over time. Using, for example, California's successful vehicular emissions standards can serve as a model here. Here in the US, advocates have asked the Department of Energy to study how these limits could best be implemented. Next, government officials should ensure their products, including digital assets, use the most energy efficient technologies possible. More than 80 countries are looking into how to deploy central bank digital currencies, and these should all be the most energy efficient technology possible. Energy policies makers can also study how to implement or make recommendations on how best to institute power density limits based on the number of kilowatts of energy consumption or load per 1,000 square feet. A power density limit could be set at an initial limit and tightened over time to allow existing mines to adjust operations. Policymakers can also study how to implement or make recommendations on how best to institute reforms, such as adjusting renewable energy credit purchase requirements for any proof of work mining operation that has added more than, for example, a certain megawatt hour per year load. They can also look into system benefit charge surcharges, which are in a variety of districts in the United States. They add a surcharge for to facilitate investment in projects for the public good. These are generally administered across the board, but they could be potentially more targeted towards miners than versus other industries or for high density miners. It's also really important that policymakers minimize the risk of switching protocols. For example, decentralized finance insurance company Nexus is seeing a huge uptick in customers in anticipation of the launch of Ethereum 2.0, but is operating within an unregulated area of insurance law in the US. A strong governance framework around DeFi insurance, among other factors, would help ensure the industry can transition to proof of stake while maintaining customer confidence. Policymakers can also take action to protect against grid strain and to encourage the use of renewable energy. In the US, it's only a matter of time until cryptocurrencies are regulated as securities, commodities, or a new analogous category as demonstrated by the proposed Loomis-Gillibrand bill. And other jurisdictions are sure to follow suit. Once cryptos are regulated by financial regulators, these regulators can impose transparency requirements regarding electricities and carbon pollution from crypto mining. These could be similar to the greenhouse gas reporting requirements recently announced by the Securities Exchange Commission here in the US under the authority from the Securities Act. Under the Commodity Exchange Act, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission can institute similar requirements. Environmental, and this way institutional investors and other investors know what they're getting and can make informed decisions about which assets to invest in. Environmental regulators can also impose similar transparency requirements. Here, the US Environmental Protection Agency is authorized to do that under the Clean Air Act. It's very important that crypto mines, when they incur interconnection or transmission costs, pay for those costs and not pass them on to ratepayers, which are ratepayers are just normal people that have to pay their utility bills every month. And next, a registry of high density mines can allow for transparency and help with public commenting processes, help agencies develop a harmonized approach to regulation, and allow for better grid management. For example, in Texas, ERCOT recently required new large crypto mines to seek permission to connect to the state's power grid and required utilities to submit studies on the impact of mines and other large users on the grid. One important component of this would be to ensure that operations that mine crypto disclose their energy sources and quantities with specificity. Policymakers can also encourage institutional investors to buy the most environmentally friendly products possible. That would more likely fall outside the scope of regulation and be in the auspices of the soft-powered electeds. There's also a variety of other actions policymakers can take to protect communities, which has the ancillary benefit of reducing backlash against crypto. So these include searching environmental reviews to protect against air, water, and noise pollution, insulation requirements to protect against noise pollution, and there's legislative authority for all of these types of reviews and requirements in the US. Utility regulators can also guard against volatility by working with utility firms and power providers to ensure miners provide security deposits or use short-term market purchases with pass-through cost arrangements when procuring energy. New York State has implemented a similar measure. This way, when the market is extremely volatile, the grid, the utilities are protected, and therefore the ratepayers are protected from that volatility. Long-term demand response contracts invite electricity arbitrage, like in Texas, and should be avoided. And circular economy provisions can mitigate the harms from e-waste. There are a number of estimates, for example, from Alex DeVries, whom I cited earlier in this presentation, that point to e-waste as a growing concern with crypto mining. We also need the private sector's help. So the private sector can contribute to this effort in a variety of ways by committing to use energy efficient protocols. We all know who this is on the bottom, Vitalik Buterin, who's switching Ethereum to proof of stake. Institutional investors can commit to purchasing only environmentally friendly digital assets, and there are some products on the market like sustainable Bitcoin protocol that allow for tracking of which crypto assets actually have been mined using renewable energy. And industry can get together and disseminate best practices and liaise with policymakers, transparent, open manner. I also briefly want to mention carbon offsets because those are top of mind when we talk about climate mitigation, but we are not recommending them as a pillar because they have a whole host of issues. Limited transparency. Oftentimes the offsets are double counted, flawed accounting, human rights issues. For example, with REDD, R-E-D-D, the offset scheme, many indigenous communities were forced out of their homes in the Amazon. Lack of a standardized framework. There are high quality offsets and there are low quality offsets. And right now it's very difficult to distinguish between the two. And just lack of cohesive regulatory framework really makes it hard to trust that offsets are doing their job. So I've left a few minutes for questions. I really want to thank you, Future Publishing, for having me and talking about how policymakers can proactively address the emissions issues from mining. And please feel free to email me, follow me on social media, and keep the conversation going. Thank you.